So, hello and welcome to our Service Design in Education series of stories. And I'm very pleased to welcome our first storyteller, Michael Doherty. So, Michael is my colleague from Lancaster University, and Michael is based in the law school. So, hello, Michael. Hi.
Hello, Radka. Thanks for asking me to be a part of this.
And today I thought it would be very nice to reflect on Michael's recent article that he has released on Medium on our channel. And the article is on legal design and its role in legal education. And this article is a sort of a summary of Michael's project that he has been working with his colleagues. So it's a much bigger piece that I believe, Michael, you've presented at some conferences as well, and you are currently writing a more substantial paper about.
That's correct. It was a project with myself and 5 colleagues at my former law school at Preston, and on the back of that substantive project, I was working with my former colleague Tina McKee to think about how we used design as part of that curriculum project. We were due to present at the Association of Law Teachers Conference. Of course, all the conferences were, the spring conferences were cancelled before they had time to move to an online pivot. So with a couple of friends, we set up something called Connecting Legal Education, which is a very informal weekly online hangout. And around about 6 or 7 hangouts in, it was my turn to talk about legal design and its role in legal education. And this short Medium article comes off the back of that presentation.
So really, thinking about law and design, it's quite an intriguing combination. And you have recently joined our network, and it's really exciting to see some more examples of using design in education. But we were probably, quite surprised to encounter a professor of law and putting it together with design. So can you tell us a little bit about your sort of personal journey to design?
Certainly, yeah. Well, it is a strange combination, and it appears to a lot of people like a strange combination. I was back in September. I was in Helsinki for the biggest legal design event in the world of that time, the Legal Design Summit, and the opening speaker was Dan Jackson, who runs the New Law Lab at Northeastern University in Boston, and he said that when he started in legal design, which was only 2-3 years ago, people looked at him like he was an alien, like he had 3 heads. And he said things are getting slightly better, but it's still quite a novel concept. I came into legal design by accident, as pretty much every legal designer did, because legal design didn't exist really until really the first steps were about 7 or 8 years ago, with 1 or 2 innovators and pioneers in different parts of the world. So I came into it because I'm a teaching and learning person. So my chair here at Lancaster is a teaching and scholarship chair, even though I do substantive research as well. And my roles throughout my career have really been in teaching and learning and academic administration, so course leadership, then being director of teaching and learning. So I've always been interested in different ways of communicating legal information and different ways of engaging students in legal learning. So that was my starting point, really. The accident part there's a number of accidents. Now I could talk about this all day, so I'll try and keep it brief. But one day about 8 years ago, I was teaching a subject that I don't normally teach, and thought, wouldn't it be interesting to see if that place was still there that was talked about in a case that I was looking at the time. So I fired up Google Maps and saw that the street was still there, and you could do street view and see that the place was still there. And I thought there must be a map of kind of interesting legal places, like a geographical map. There must be some. It's so obvious someone must have thought of it, and nobody had. So I kind of sat on it for about 2 years and kept thinking, I must come back to that idea. And eventually I did, and I got a small amount of money, and I worked with a team, and we created something called Open Law Map, which was a kind of a mashup between Google Maps and a WordPress blog site. And I started using that with the students in induction events, partly to give them a kind of a real concrete sense of the place that they come to study was a place where interesting legal things had happened. So I set up a walking tour that linked to this online map, and I won some teaching awards for that. But I was thinking about this idea of like legal geography and visualization, and by random I came across an article on legal visualization by someone who's now a good friend called Helena Hapio, who's a Finnish professor of contract law. And it was really through that one article that I found by random that I found this sort of new world of legal design. And I'd done some conceptual work in legal design. So I've looked at it as from the point of view of disciplinarity, so kind of a sociology of how knowledge is organized. So that's quite a conceptual piece, and a cultural perspective. So kind of an anthropological perspective, looking at the tensions between legal culture and design culture. But really, first and foremost, as an educator, I thought about bringing design into what I do as an educator.
So it sounds like you really sort of connected design with your discipline, and a lot of the work you describe is very much connected to that stuff, the legal education. What you talk about in the article is most of thinking about the curriculum and how the curriculum is structured. So that's almost sort of another step that you've taken and sort of moved on your thinking more towards that sort of service design and adapting it to the sort of curriculum development and design. Where did the inspiration come from?
Sure. Well, really my first project was a kind of a legal visualization project. So about 3 years ago, I got a small grant to work with an undergraduate research intern. So I worked with a second year graphic design student, and we did a 10-week project on tenants' rights. And it was inspired by something called the Center for Urban Pedagogy in New York City, who do this kind of public information, public legal education work where they get community and advocacy groups and put them together with information designers to communicate these things more effectively to people who need to know what their rights and responsibilities are. So it was my kind of small version of that, and we did it about tenants' rights, students as tenants. And this was the way in which quite a few sort of legal designers started, certainly the ones from an academic point of view. So Helena Hapio was a contract commercial lawyer, so she used visualization and information design to try to make contracts more effective and more usable for the business people who commission those contracts, rather than being written for lawyers, only understandable by lawyers. And people in the States in these legal innovation labs were using them for the access to justice crisis. So people being excluded from justice, people having to represent themselves at court because they couldn't afford legal representation. So it was academics kind of looking outside of the walls of their law schools for problems where they could use the design stroke legal skills to solve. And I'm still really interested in that. But it struck me that we don't have to look beyond the walls of the law school, that there are already lots and lots of problems or lots of challenges in our day-to-day work as educators. And there are lots of, to use a quasi design term, lots of wicked problems in education. Problems around engagement and attainment and accessibility, and the BAME attainment gap, etc., etc. So it struck me that there were all sorts of problems right in front of me, where service design potentially could be used to think about those things a little bit differently, even for people who were experienced educators and education developers and curriculum designers.
Mm. And you've taken that stuff curriculum of the, was it a degree, the LLB degree? So what was the wicked problem on the LLB degree that you wanted to tackle?
Okay, so this was the undergraduate law degree at Lancashire Law School at UCLan in Preston. And I'd been a part of that school for a quarter of a century. In 1993 I joined. And I had been essentially the director of teaching and learning for around about a decade. The opportunity that arose was that there was a big change in the external environment. So the external professional regulators in law were really changing how they were looking at people qualifying to be solicitors. And therefore we were prompted to look at our curriculum anyway, but we took the opportunity, rather than just make the sort of minimum changes to address that, to look at it in almost a root and branch rethink. So some of the stuff was structural. So we moved from 6 20 credit modules to 4 30 credit modules. So we simplified the structure quite a bit. But some of the problems we were facing were the usual ones of engagement, in particular engagement in small group sessions, the preparation for seminars. And this wasn't a problem that was in any way specific to us. I've got quite a big professional network in law, and I was hearing the same issues coming up time and time again. I was seeing on Twitter people from Russell Group University Law Schools tweeting pictures of completely empty classrooms where nobody had turned up for the seminar. So there was engagement. We had Preston, we had very big ethnic minority population in our law school, roundabout. So it was between 50 and 55%. And the biggest single group of students we had were around about 45% of our students were British Asian heritage students. And some of my colleagues were very interested in the different levels of satisfaction and engagement between those groups. That our BAME and our British Asian students attended as often as our white students, but in research that my colleagues carried out, they used less positive language about their experience. There's a well-documented attainment gap between BAME students and white students throughout UK higher education. And the other inspiration was just some of the stuff that we'd read as educators. So we'd had this feeling that that students weren't connecting their learning, that they would learn something in the first year in one module, and when they passed that module, they'd close the file and they'd put it under their bed or in the attic or in the loft and never ever look at it again. And we wanted to get to move to program level outcomes so that we could say that at the end of the degree, a student who we graduated was able to do certain things. And the way to achieve that was by linking the learning. And that builds on some work by people like Dilly Fung, who's an educational researcher at UCL, who's written a great free open textbook on the connected curriculum.
Yeah, so that's stuff, the sense of connected curriculum and you know, the move from the stuff students studying these siloed modules to having a bit of a broader perception. So that really came strongly from your article. And you also mentioned that you've taken that stuff, you know, approach of the design thinking, and you've used some of the stuff methods that we used in the service design. Were there any particular stuff methods you would like to reflect on and maybe even recommend to colleagues who are thinking about maybe using the service design approach to improve their curriculum?
Certainly, yeah. Obviously, the two leading models in the world on service design are the double diamond, so the British Design Council double diamond, and the alternative is the Stanford model of design thinking. And partly because kind of my friend now, but my intellectual hero is the head of the legal design lab at Stanford University, Margaret Hagan. So I think I was quite drawn to the Stanford model, which talks about the first stage being to empathize and then define the problem, and then to generate lots of ideas, and to prototype quickly, and then to test and implement. So that provided us with quite a nice structure. In the team, certainly 4 out of the 6 team members were very experienced. Between the 6 of us, we had over 100 years of experience within that particular law school. So we felt as though we'd gone through lots of curriculum designs before, and for, I would say it must be the last 20 years, we've been talking about student-centered learning. And student-centered learning generally involved various professors and lecturers sat together in a room, deciding what was best for the students. So it will be best for the students if we do X, Y, and Z. So some of the methods that we used to break them down in that empathize and define stage, we were able to build on some of the previous research that my colleagues had done about the experience of students within our school. We were able to draw upon kind of our own experiences as well, and I was a bit unsure about that. But reading some of the literature, it says, no, if you know the service, you take that into account. You don't disregard your own knowledge and experience of the service. But we still felt that there were some gaps in our knowledge and understanding about what would be the hooks and the triggers and motivations. So we used UX interviews. We were aware of the power relationships, so we didn't do them ourselves. We hired a third-year student to do user experience interviews with first-year students that asked them questions that hadn't really been asked before, partly around the sort of motivation for choosing law, but partly how being a law student related to the entirety of their life. So we asked them questions about what the parents or their family, well, we had quite a lot of students, what their children thought about them being a law student, what their friends thought about it. If there was anything they'd learnt in their first year that they'd gone home and told their friends and students about, what was the thing that most excited them in their first year. And that gave us lots of insights. So that was the kind of empathize and define stage. I could take a break, but perhaps if I go back to you, I mean, there's lots of other examples I can give.
What really struck me, I really liked what you wrote in the article about this sort of visibility of the students in the decision-making process. And that you kept the students visible. And so I think this is actually one of the strengths. It is the empathy, but it's reminding ourselves, like you said, that we sometimes make assumptions, don't we? We think what's good for the students, and we design the curriculum maybe around our research or our availability sometimes, or our own interests. But what I really like as well is how you connect the sort of law and the law education with the students' life. They are, after all, human beings with a much wider context. And again, I think we sometimes, in education, forget that these students have life after, and they're connecting what they take in the school, in the lecture theatre. They are connecting it with their day-to-day life.
Yeah, we used user personas. This notion of putting the user at the center was really important to us, partly because of some of the functional things that I've talked about, wanting to get a law degree that functioned better, but partly because of kind of a values approach. That we all of us in the team thought that we had a moral or an ethical responsibility to our students to design a program that worked the best for them. Now, in the curriculum validation, so when we validated the structure, we did the normal student consultation there, which is that you write out a structure on a piece of paper, you provide a rationale for it, you consult with 3 or 4 student volunteers, and then the validation panel come and they also speak to some students on the program, and that's fine. That's okay. But we thought that user personas allowed us to do maybe a couple of things sort of different or extra to that. So one of them was that that having user personas enabled us to keep the student perspective more visible on a week-by-week basis, whilst we're in the middle of making decisions rather than consulting them on the end product. And these personas, perhaps just to explain it, so to represent round about 200 students, we came up with 3 personas, and we followed the normal service design approach for personas. So they had a name, and they had a face, and they were from places, and they had educational backgrounds, and they had interests outside of university. They all worked part-time, like a lot of our students did at Preston. And on sort of 2 sides, really on one side of A4, we were able to get kind of someone's life story. And the second thing was we were able to represent a much wider range of characteristics. It's the reality that the people who you asked to volunteer for curriculum development consultations tend to be a certain type of student. And the students we love are the ones who are super enthusiastic and super positive about the program, and they love their teachers, and they love law. So they come along and everything's great, everything's rosy in the garden and everything's going to work. But they don't represent really the lived experience or the perspectives of a significant proportion of students. So by getting students who had significant caring responsibilities, who don't have the time to volunteer for those things, or students who because they're young men who want to appear cool, don't want to appear to be kind of part of the school system. So we're able to represent different sorts of characteristics and different sorts of people. And it was so interesting that our 3 people, so Nazir and Terry and Karen, they took on a life of their own very, very quickly. So for the team, they became real people, and we were quite invested in them. And we wanted to know whether what we were designing was going to work for them. That was a really interesting element of it.
Yeah, so I think it's a fantastic example of using personas, and it creates just much more inclusive way of looking at the curriculum, isn't it? So I think you mentioned a really important point, that the student representatives that we usually work with, we tend to work with, they are not really, they rarely represent the whole portfolio of the cohort. I'm also interested in sort of your colleagues' response, and I'm just going to bring up your quote that I really like from your article, because I think has it been contagious as well from what the people saw? Has other colleagues, have you managed to sort of inspire other colleagues? Because you talk here about law teachers with different interests, that you came together and you used it, sort of brought you together, this sort of design approach. And of course you were all centered around that sort of student experience. But what about your colleagues? Has it stayed within this group, or have you managed to sort of excite people from outside this team?
To some extent, yes, and to some extent, no. So I'll start with the negative first. So what we ended up creating and designing was a really ambitious redesign of a year 1 of a general undergraduate law degree, and it really sort of changed the sort of weekly structure and the learning pathways, what tutors had to do. And some aspects of that have not been taken up, and it's partly because I left Preston, and I would have been driving the design elements of how we implemented the first year. So, for example, we came up with a uniform icon set to make learning visible and to make the connections visible. So where we had learning outcomes in relation to research, the idea was that we'd use this icon set to almost sort of brand and connect where students were developing and extending their research skills in all sorts of different modules and different activities. I understand that hasn't been implemented in quite the way in which we would have hoped. The other is in relation to prototyping. So the first two modules in the first semester, so before I left, I was able to sit down with the module tutor for the other module, and we were able to sort of prototype and in a fairly informal way do a user experience map of how the students would engage with my module, which was public law, constitutional law, and her module, which was legal skills, legal method. And we're able to sketch out in a prototype overall what the learning would look like in that week, to make sure that we were working together and not in opposition to each other, that we were picking up on each other's learning activities and reinforcing and creating a virtuous spiral. And it was difficult because of time pressure. And again, that was something that kind of fell by the wayside a little bit. On the positive side, it still has made a difference. So the way in which the year tutor for the first year of the law degree is dealing with implementation and review and changing for the next iteration of the program is very much informed by design thinking. And one of my other colleagues was able to carve out time to do service safari type activities. So she's been doing, she's been following students as they experience teaching over the course of 2 or 3 days, and has been able to come back and reflect on that. And I've been able to take, see, in some ways I was in a really fortunate position that I've been there for 25 years. I'd worked with this team of people for quite a long time. We'd already worked on successfully implementing legal educational innovation projects. So I had trust, and I had the trust of the team. And when I said, this might sound crazy, but let's work in this way, they went, well, okay, we trust you. In my new role, it's obviously a bit different. So I've come in, nobody knows me. I've come in a senior position, but I need to be able to bring people with me rather than just tell them what to do. So I couldn't do that all in 100% kind of service design approach at Lancaster, but I have done service safaris. So I've done a day in the life of a final year law student, a day in the life of a criminology student, and been able to gain really great insights by doing that. And that's excited a lot of interest from colleagues, and I've started using an icon set to connect learning in different modules to try to create a more coherent thing. So it doesn't make the work go away, does it? It sort of generates as much work as it resolves. And some things work and some things don't, but that's true in any educational project and in any design project.
We sometimes think about the impact, what's the impact of these initiatives, and many colleagues who sort of are starting this journey, they feel maybe faced a little bit by the amount of work, there's a lot of work involved. When you think about this particular project that you've written about, and if you were asked by the Vice Chancellor of Lancaster, if you had to justify why you took the approach, and what has been the impact, and how do you know it has been different from your more traditional curriculum design approach?
This is always the most difficult question in any service design project, and it's a very common criticism, certainly for service design projects in the community, that the implementation phase and the measuring impact phase is very often done poorly, if it's done at all, and that accounts for some of the skepticism that's out there, certainly in industry, about the design sprint approach. That it's a great way for getting people together and producing lots of energy and getting lots of ideas, but then where do these ideas go? And if you go somewhere, do they work? So my friend and colleague, Margaret Hagan, who's at Stanford, has sort of recognised this, and she set out around about 18 months ago to be far more focused. So she now only works in relation to eviction, so legal support in relation to people at risk of being evicted, because she wants to work through and see the impact of some of the things that she's done rather than working on 7 or 8 different projects. What I think the positives that we can say is that the team felt that it was a fantastic way to work. They felt that we generated more good ideas by doing this deep collaboration rather than working as separate module leaders and saying, that's my content, live with that. My understanding is that the marks seem to be better this year than they have been in previous year, but there's that persistent problem with measuring the impact of educational interventions, of causation versus correlation. You know, we honestly can't say for sure that what we did resulted in an increase in retention and an enhanced grade profile and so forth. All that we can say is we did those things and these things happened, and we think it's reasonable to assume that there was some positive impact from that.
I guess, you know, we sometimes look for these metrics and, you know, we are maybe desperate, but what you said at the beginning is like, you know, the impact of the team feeling that this worked well for them, you know, for you as a team, you felt quite engaged and happy. And, you know, how many times can we really say this, you know, when we are thinking about curriculum, about program design, how many times can we really say, oh, I really enjoyed, you know, getting stuck into this and working together, generating ideas, thinking about how the impact is going to be, you know, on the students. So I think if the outcome was just, you know, this, I think that's amazing anyway, isn't it? Is to make it.
And I just add, because when we think of outcomes, sometimes we just think of hard metrics, but some of the response that I got to my service safari at Lancaster, my sort of day in the life, where I spent a whole day with a 3rd-year undergraduate law student. I met them at breakfast time in the hall of residence, and we went into class together, and we spent time in between classes together. And I was going to stay with them till about 8 or 9 o'clock at night, but around about 6 o'clock, I felt so sorry for them, having me kind of hovering around behind. But what they said was that they were really amazed that I'd done it. And the other 30 students said, this is fantastic. No one's ever done anything like this before. And they said, it makes us feel as though you're interested in us and you're interested in our experience. And those are the sorts of things that we need to write down and include in our evaluations. And if we're asked to justify these sorts of things to senior managers, those are the sorts of things that we do need to capture, and probably capture them a bit more effectively than we tend to do. You know, as teachers, first and foremost teachers, we just concentrate on the teaching, on getting the class right and the program right. But to some extent, I think we do need to be a bit more strategic and a bit more savvy around gathering evidence of positive impact of what we do.
Absolutely. Well, what a great you know, tone to finish on. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much, Michael. And can I just ask, what can we look forward to with your piece? I know you are writing it for a journal, so can you give us a bit of an insight about where you are thinking of placing your publication?
Yes. So I presented twice already with a very different theme. So I've presented it first at a round table on legal design methodology from Catholic University Leuven in Belgium. There wasn't an educational conference, but it was people who use legal design in all sorts of different areas, and we were trying to get some sort of common methodologies and structures from that. So there'll be some research output from that. But the other thing is I've done the same project, but more of a focus on the educational elements. And that we've been invited to submit that for an edited collection being published by Routledge as part of their legal education series of books. And it's by my friend and colleague, Emily Alban, who's been doing really amazing work in visualization and access to online skills learning materials. And she's one of my co-authors for the Medium piece that you mentioned at the start. So myself and Tina are going to finish that this summer. It's quite a short word limit, so it's only 5,000 words, which is quite short for a chapter. We're going to submit that in September, and that should be published. Soon. Yeah, and some of my other work on legal design as an academic discipline. I'll be working on that again, summer and autumn. And maybe in the pipeline, I've got this idea for a legal design journal, because I know we've discussed this before. One of the problems we have as designers in education is where to publish our work. And one response is, if there isn't any platform for us to publish our work, let's make one. Let's approach the problem like designers would, in problem-solving mode.
Yeah, so maybe there is a place for a design in education journal, more in general, anyway.
Absolutely,
yeah,
absolutely. And perhaps just a comment to finish on, because so I do these kind of weekly online hangouts where we get different legal education ideas, and I often share them. My first question when I hear about these sort of really big legal education innovation projects is, that's fantastic, but are there any smaller takeaways for our audience? If they don't have 80 hours to devote to this, is there anything they can do to start doing some of this brilliant stuff, in September in their first class? And what I would say about service design is, what we did at Lancashire Law School in Preston was quite a structured, reasonably full service design end-to-end project. But it doesn't have to be that way. You can take any of those things. So my recommendation for a toolkit would be Mark Stickdorn's book, This is Service Design Doing. Really, really practical, which Adam Lawrence, who's part of our network, is a co-author of that. And just open it at random. Find some method that's in there and just do it. And from that, you'll learn how to do design and be a designer by that process of doing and reflecting and so forth. You can start small and build from that.
Absolutely. I think that's a great advice for everybody listening to our interview, to our discussion, because sometimes you can feel a bit of an imposter syndrome. You think, I've not been educated as a designer, I don't even know where to start. But yeah, why not just grab one of these tools? If your heart is in the right place, if you are interested in in the experience of the students, of your own experience in the education, I think that's a great place to start, and just experiment. Just give it a go and see what happens.
Absolutely, yeah.
Thank you so much, Michael. It was great talking to you.
Thank you for having me. It's been a real pleasure.
Yeah, we'll see you at one of our events again, and looking forward to the future exciting projects. I'm hoping that you will connect with us in the management school as well, and we can do something together. So I'm looking forward to that. So thank you so much.
Absolutely, and thanks again.
Thank you.